Therese Taylor Stinson is an ordained deacon and elder in the Presbyterian Church and founding director of the Spiritual Directors of Color Network. She offered this powerhouse opening talk at the Mystic Soul Conference that Doug mentioned a couple weeks ago, where she spoke about the need to reclaim the African roots of the Christian tradition and of the particularities of offering spiritual care and healing to people of color in the life of the Spirit. She wove a song throughout her talk, a spiritual with deep roots in the Black church and in movements for civil rights in this country. I'd like to invoke it here now in gratitude to Therese. If you know it, please sing it with me. I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. When the Spirit say do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. Can we sing that together? I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. When the Spirit say do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. Ooh, y'all sound good. Music is prayer and revelation. I think I have memories of hearing mommy singing to me from inside her womb. I know for certain that I grew up wrapped in the sweet melodies of her voice. Maybe that's where my love of music came from. Perhaps I inherited it from her. My grandfather on my dad's side, Papa Reino, was a musician, or so I've heard. I never met him. Actually, neither did my dad. He died in 1959 while my grandmother was pregnant with my father. We have one photo of him that we found about 10 years ago. The first photo of his father that my dad had ever seen. He's dressed in white, standing proud in front of a small wooden house in the campo where my family is from, Hicome, with a cigarette hanging off his lip and a big accordion in his hands. Sometimes I try to talk to him in prayer, and then I wonder if he can even understand my English, or if my Spanish is too different, too Dominican York for my ancestors to make out at this point. What little I do know is he was kind, committed, and creative. Did I inherit that from him? I know growing up I also know that he died of alcoholism, like so many men of the men in my family. I wonder if I inherited that from him. I know growing up without his father made my dad committed to being the best father he could be. He's taught me so much about responsibility and just showing up, even when it's hard. I carry that now. And I know Papi lived most of his life with a deep sadness, wondering why his father would abandon him just as he was coming into this world. I wonder sometimes if I inherited that loneliness, that sense that I could be left alone at any moment. Close your eyes for a moment, family. Who were your people? Let yourself see their faces if you know what they look like. What of them is in you? Take a breath. What I know for sure is that I am because they were. I know they were because I am. I've spent the last few years trying to learn as much as I can about my family ancestry. Something about coming to this country as young as I did, where it was made abundantly clear that I'm not from here, but that I'm also not really from there either. It gave me the sense that I wasn't really from anywhere. My story is like many of us who are part of the African diaspora, whether we're US African American, Dominican, Haitian, Brazilian, or from any of the other nations where our people, our ancestors were shipped. There's just not much information about who my people were. There are no public records to speak of in the town where we're from. So I'm relying on the memories of my living kin that are slowly fading as they age and transition. There's this feeling of rootlessness, something I've spoken of as moving through the world like a ghost. Disconnection and stolen histories, just some of the lesser spoken wages of the beast of Babylon. I think I was in high school when I first learned that there are spiritual traditions that take the role of ancestors very seriously. Traditions that understand God a little bit differently, that live outside the walls of a church, that connect with parts of who we are and who God is, that I never really heard talked about in churches. I'm speaking of the traditions rooted in the African spiritualities that the enslaved held on to when they were stolen to American shores. As the world becomes more and more religiously pluralist, as they say, which just means that we recognize truth and wisdom in other spiritual traditions, and even have folks practicing multiple traditions at once, the African-based traditions are conspicuously absent from these discussions, even in the most progressive religious spaces. I was a junior in high school when a friend of mine sat in the library and photocopied an entire book on Santeria for me, front to back. This is the African tradition that emerged in the Cuban context. It'd be more than a decade before I'd learned that there's a tradition particular to the DR called the 21 Divisions. Anyway, I come home with my 300-some page book, all excited and curious. I wasn't even particularly spiritual at this time, but something was drawing me, some hunger, a thirst to know more about who I am, about my people, about God. My grandmother was visiting from the DR at this time, and I didn't see her do this. I'll say that up front. But all I know is that one second the book was on my desk, and the next it was sitting in the trash. Eso es brujería. That is witchcraft, black magic. Don't touch it, don't talk about it, don't even ask about it. It wasn't a long conversation, but it was made very clear that this spiritual ancestry of ours was completely and utterly off limits. How did my people get convinced that our indigenous ways of knowing God are wrong? Why did we come to believe that it is impossible to love God and love Jesus and also honor and respect the many ways our people know and connect with the divine? What does it mean to connect authentically with God when we've been denied our people's wisdom on this higher power, this mystery that we call God? Amen? Amen. Family, this root work, reconnecting to our ancestry and the spiritual wisdom that it holds, this is soul repair. This is mending the fabric of our beings back together with the thread of truth and calling one another to the wholeness that is our birthright. It is about listening for the call of spirit and letting it guide us back to integrity. When the Spirit say do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. This is one way of putting what brought me and hundreds of other people out to the Mystic Soul Conference last week in Chicago. Empire has tried to steal our histories and hide our knowings, but they have failed. And there's a movement rising of people of color reclaiming and remembering that which has been lost or hidden, fashioning new traditions that work for us beyond the confines of what we've been told we can have, and accessing that which will give us the power, the strength, the resilience to come out of Babylon into futures we have yet to imagine. Fallen is Babylon the Great. Let's take a breath. That was for me, but I think y'all needed it too. So I don't watch a lot of TV, but I recently got put onto a show that's been blowing my mind. Has anybody here seen Underground? Yes. So Underground tells the story of a group of black women and men who are enslaved on a cotton plantation in Georgia, and their escape to freedom through the Underground Railroad. The show opens with the main character, Noah, running through a wooded swamp in the dead of night. The shots are close and abrupt, giving you the sense of the urgency, the terror, the chaos of this moment. Light from torches, barking dogs, all framed by the muffled breathlessness of a man who's literally running for his life. He's taken the ultimate risk for freedom, and getting caught now would mean certain death, if not something much worse. Noah gets abducted by slave catchers. These are white men who make their money off of hunting people, making their way to freedom. And he gets thrown in a jail cell. In that jail cell, Noah meets a dying man who tells him he's found a map that points the way to freedom. That he's carved it on the wall, knowing he'll be dead soon. Hopeless and overcome with despair, Noah shrugs him off. But the man grabs him by the arm, stares him in the eyes, and says with the conviction that nothing has ever mattered more than what he is about to say. You gotta have faith, he says. You run. You follow that map. I've seen the devil's grin, but I missed the angel's light. You be ready when you get to that river. And he dies. Noah hardly understood a word he said, but he sneaks over to the corner and finds words carved into the wooden wall. Most of it he can't even read, save for one word: freedom. The map turns out to be lyrics to a song, a spiritual, with landmarks hidden in code, symbols that could hide in plain sight and point the way to freedom. The characters on this show are fictional for the most part. That's all I'll say. Hashtag no spoilers. But this story is grounded in the very real history of violence, racism, and slavery at the foundations of this nation. It also gives a window into the courage, the strength, the organizing savvy, the unimaginable faith that drove enslaved people to risk everything for their liberation. My people were enslaved in a cattle society in the Caribbean, which differs in some important ways from cotton plantations in the US or sugar plantations on the Haitian side of the island. And much of that history has been hidden or stolen from my people. But watching this US narrative unfold, I know beyond knowing that this is a vision of the shared inheritance of all our people of the African diaspora. This is not just about collective pain, but transgenerational brilliance and power and knowledge of a black God that can and will do the impossible to us and through us in the most harrowing of situations. This is wisdom that lives in our muscles, faith embedded in our DNA, Power shining in the very melanated cells that make them want to destroy us. The fact that the very religion imposed on our people by the slave masters could even become maps to freedom is to me a testimony to the brilliance of Black people and to God's unfailing commitment to life and to freedom. I haven't been able to get this map out of my head as I've been spending time with the book of Revelation over the past couple weeks. This text, family, is underground literature. It was written by people dreaming of freedom during the painful unraveling of the Roman Empire. Fallen is Babylon the Great. We aren't the first people living through the death of an empire. Social and economic unrest has intensified. Violence and land grabs are rampant. The poor are being starved to death while the rich fill their coffers with stolen resources. I mean, does this sound familiar? These communities are trying to hold on to faith and each other in the face of unrelenting persecution that will not let up. I can't help but wonder if John isn't using this fantastic language, this almost undecipherable symbolism, because he's afraid of what might happen should this fall into the hands of the cops or whatever imperial authority we're talking about at the time. So you hide the message in code. Follow the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd. The old man's waiting there to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. So empire becomes the beast. The Emperor Nero hides behind the number 666. The people of God become the 144,000, led by a lamb and flanked by an army of angels. The city of Rome becomes the whore of Babylon. Now, this is a place where we have to be discerning about the elements of this text that can serve our liberation and those that are toxic and downright violent. This gendered, sexualized language where Rome is symbolized as woman that is violated and attacked. This is violent imagery that we have to reject. Even as we hold that these people were trying to get free in the formation of this text, we can hold these two complicated truths in tension. That contradiction actually moves us closer to the truth of our humanity and our propensity to get things wrong, even in our struggles for liberation. So read this text with caution and a discerning spirit, family. Fallen is Babylon the Great. The kings of the earth have sold themselves for the promise of Babylon's riches. Merchants have grown rich off her luxury and power. All nations drink wine laced with the blood of the innocents. It seems like every morning there's another news story exposing yet another foul and hateful beast from the underbelly of US American Babylon. Yet another demon, yet another specter of a past this nation has never reckoned with, much less made reparations for. 2 weeks ago, the President of the United States was recorded asking why the US should consider, and forgive my language, but this is a direct quote, why the US should consider taking immigrants from shithole countries like Haiti, as opposed to, say, Norway. We're now in a state in this country where moments like this cause a momentary uproar, and in a day or two, we're on to the next thing. No consequence, no accountability. What strikes me as so deeply sinister and revealing about this comment is that the US has done everything in its power to cripple and exploit the nation of Haiti since its inception. And many, if not most, of the challenges that nation faces are a direct result of US and European sabotage. And this goes way back before Trump. Indulge me as I share a little history. 1791, less than 15 years after the US colonies staged revolution claiming freedom and liberty for all, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were shipping arms and munitions to French plantation owners on the island to stop the, quote, alarming insurrection of Negroes. After independence, France forced the new republic to pay the equivalent of $20 billion in lost property to slave owners, something Haiti was paying back up to 1947. 2009, the US State Department, under then President Obama, teamed up with Levi Strauss and other corporations to block legislation that would have increased the minimum wage in Haiti, keeping labor costs cheap for US companies and keeping working class Haitians poor. And within all this, the US has maintained punishing immigration policies based on anti-blackness and xenophobia, specifically targeting Haiti. You see, Haiti represents something that white supremacy cannot abide. The Haitian Revolution was the most successful slave rebellion in history, and it created the first free black republic in the world. Its very existence challenged everything the United States stands for, claims to stand for, and has continued to expose its hypocrisy just a couple hundred miles off its shores. Haiti remains a beacon of black freedom, self-determination, land and dignity. Try as they have to grind it to dust. And then there's a piece to the story of the Haitian Revolution that hardly ever gets told, even in our more progressive spaces. And that is this: the Haitian Revolution began with a voodoo ceremony. August 14th, 1791, dozens of people gathered in the northern mountains of the country, a place now marked sacred, known as Bois Caiman. A ceremony was performed that night. A loa was called down through prayers and ritual. And as word of this ceremony spread, a power and a might grew among the people that allowed them to take down a colonial superpower with all its guns, all its ships, all its forts, all its money. Talk about a God that will do the impossible for the sake of our lives and our freedom. How fitting that a divine intervention of this magnitude be erased from history. It's no wonder that our people are brainwashed into thinking these practices are demonic, when we've got access to spiritual power this immense. Framing these traditions as evil is the spiritual arm of the beast of white supremacy. It is a vestige of plantation Christianity that has us looking at our own people with fear and distrust. Hear me when I say, we can love God and love Jesus and also connect to our indigenous ways of knowing God. At the very least, we honor our ways of knowing God and bless the ways of others. If we are committed to confronting injustice as a Christian community, we must challenge Christian supremacy and the demonization of African spiritual traditions in particular. If we are committed to black liberation and ending white supremacy, we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Haiti and fight the ongoing assaults on her people. I have particular work to do on this front with my Dominican people. But what is yours? What would it look like for this to become central to your understanding of connecting with God authentically and confronting injustice? Let's take a breath. When the spirits say do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the spirits say do. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so you do not share in her plagues. As I've been watching Underground, I've been really struck by its depiction of the day-to-day realities of the plantation system. Beneath the drama of the storyline, there's this window into how ingeniously the plantation was designed to keep people in their place and keep the machine running. The enslaved are kept there by threat of death and torture. And then there's the masters who live in the lap of luxury, literally on the backs of the enslaved. Those extremes are in a way simple in their clarity. But then there's all these gradations introduced. The difference in the conditions of the field slaves and those working in the house. Power dynamics and who's willing to risk what. There's the masters at one end, and then there's the white overseers that own nothing but their status as gatekeepers, and the hatred this seems to generate in their hearts. There's a character who's a black overseer of the field slaves, somehow moving as if he were part of the white world, as if they would ever let him be one of them. Free black people in and out of the resistance, and liberal whites, morally disturbed by what they see, but engaged to varying degrees in actually doing anything about it. We've been talking about fractals here at New Day. And I know this is kind of a jargony concept, but all it means is this. The small scale has within it the seed of the large scale. In the small scale, we find a microcosm of the large. I think it's useful to view the plantation system as a fractal of US empire. This society and its institutions are designed to keep wealth flowing into the hands of the masters. Last year, the richest 1% took home 82% of global wealth. Babylon has a role for everyone to play to keep the machine running. And all kinds of pressures, threats, and bribes to keep everyone in their place. Is this the role you're playing now? Family, are we replicating plantation dynamics in our workplaces, in our schools, in the privacy of our own homes and intimate relationships? Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. What would it look like for you to live your life as a small-scale version of the future you're longing for? We don't have to wait. In fact, we cannot wait for all this to collapse, to start living as fractals of who we're meant to become. We start practicing the new ways now, building families where we don't pretend to own our partners, yeah? Where our children aren't our property. Schools that aren't set up like prisons, but like gardens, pretending the flourishing of our young. Organizations and workplaces with shared leadership and collaborative, non-hierarchical power structures. What would it look like to start living these futures right now? Once the plan to escape is set, and the characters on Underground know they're gonna run, the plantation doesn't disappear. But every moment, every choice, every action becomes an opportunity for them to undermine the system. The system wants us overwhelmed and paralyzed with grand visions of what it means to be doing the work. But if we're clear that we are called to a subversive faith, that the true God of liberation is still breaking through, calling us out of Babylon, every single moment in our lives, every action, every choice we make can be the seed for this new reality we know is possible. It's not going to be easy. But we come from people who knew the impossible is the least we can demand of ourselves. Our ancestors are at our backs. God's angels flank our sides. And Spirit is calling us forward to that freedom we know is ours to have. It's up to us to listen for Spirit and move when it's time to move. When the Spirit say do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. Amen.